The forest was quiet that morning, but the silence was heavy, filled with shadows that stretched like fingers between the ancient trees. Mist curled around the roots and the rocks, hiding secrets that only the brave or the desperate would seek. At the edge of a clearing, a faint whimper broke the stillness. It was small, weak, and trembling. A little wolf pup, its fur matted and stained with mud and dried blood, lay alone on the cold ground. Its tiny legs could barely support it. The other packs had passed it by without a second glance. In a world ruled by strength, the weak were often left behind. Its eyes, wide and searching, reflected a world that had already forgotten it. Far away, hidden among the tall pines, a figure moved silently. Lyra, an omega of her pack, paused when she heard the pup's soft cries. She had been wandering the forest, avoiding the mocking stares and cruel whispers of her own kind. Being an omega meant she was the lowest in the hierarchy, always overlooked, always pushed aside. Yet something about the pitiful howl stirred her heart. She stepped closer, careful to stay in the shadows. The pup's tiny whines grew louder as she approached. Its small body trembled, and a faint, pitiful yelp escaped its mouth. Lyra knelt beside it, her own hands trembling. "Shh. It's okay," she whispered, her voice soft and warm, though her heart pounded in fear. She knew she could be seen by the others. She knew helping the weak could bring her trouble. But she couldn't leave it to suffer. Not like this. The pup looked up at her with eyes so full of fear and need that Lyra's chest tightened. Its tiny nose twitched, sensing her warmth. Slowly, carefully, she scooped it into her arms. Its body was so light, so fragile, that it felt like holding a feather soaked in sorrow. Lyra wrapped her cloak around the pup to keep it warm. She could feel its rapid heartbeat against her chest. The forest was full of dangers. Wolves, rival packs, even the older predators that prowled silently. Any of them could be a threat. But Lyra ignored the fear. Her mind focused only on the little life she had found. Step by step, she carried it through the underbrush, slipping between trees and over roots, careful not to make a sound. By midday, Lyra found a small clearing near a stream. The sun shone weakly through the clouds and the water sparkled faintly. Here she could rest. She laid the pup down gently, examining it. Its legs seemed broken and small scratches ran across its soft belly. Lyra's heart ached. "You've been through so much," she murmured. She searched the nearby brush for herbs she had learned to use for healing. Her pack had mocked her for her soft ways, saying she was too weak, too small to matter. But now, in this quiet clearing, her skill mattered more than anyone's opinion. Lyra cleaned the pup's wounds carefully, tying small splints to its injured leg and whispering comfort all the while. "You'll be all right," she promised. She felt a strange connection forming. The pup was small, vulnerable, yet full of life. It reminded her of herself, always overlooked, always cast aside. As the afternoon stretched, the wind whispered through the trees. Lyra glanced around nervously. Wolves were creatures of hierarchy and pride. If the alpha or any pack member discovered her, they might mock her again, or worse, punish her for helping what others had discarded. She had no choice but to hide here until nightfall. The pup, despite its pain, rested quietly against her chest, trusting her in a way no one else had ever trusted her. Night fell quickly, and the forest became a different place. Shadows grew longer, and strange sounds echoed through the trees. Hoots of owls, rustling of leaves, the distant roar of a larger wolf. Lyra held the pup close, her heart racing with fear and wonder. She had never felt so alive and so small at the same time. Suddenly, movement in the shadows made her freeze. Amber eyes glowed, reflecting the moonlight. They were big, calculating, and filled with power. Lyra's heart stopped. From the darkness, a tall, strong wolf stepped into the clearing. He was magnificent, with silver-streaked fur and a presence that made the air seem heavier. This was Kale, the alpha king of the northern packs. Few had ever seen him up close, and fewer still had survived the encounter. Kale's gaze fell on Lyra and the pup. He said nothing at first, only observed, every detail registering in his sharp mind. Most would tremble before him. Most would drop to the ground in fear. But Lyra did neither. She held the pup firmly, her small frame standing tall even though her chest ached with terror. "Who is this you've brought?" Kale finally spoke, his voice deep and commanding, yet strangely calm. It carried authority like the weight of mountains, but also a hidden curiosity. Lyra's voice was soft, barely a whisper. "I found it. No one else would help." She swallowed, unsure if she could meet his gaze. Her heart pounded in her chest. She expected anger, punishment, maybe even dismissal, but his eyes did not flash with rage. They were sharp, observant, and almost impressed. The pup stirred, sensing the tension. Its small whimpers broke the silence. Cale stepped closer, careful not to frighten the little creature. He studied the tiny wolf, then looked back at Lyra. There was something in his gaze that she could not read. Was it judgment, curiosity, or something else entirely? Lyra held her breath. In that moment, the world seemed to shrink. The forest, the shadows, the fear, all of it condensed into the space between her and Cale. She felt exposed, and yet strangely connected to him, as if he could see her very soul. Cale knelt slightly, letting his massive frame seem less threatening. "You risked yourself for this one," he said quietly. Most would have ignored it. His voice carried weight not just in words but in meaning. Lyra could feel the weight of his life, the power he carried, and the loneliness behind it. I couldn't leave it," Lyra said simply. "It would have died." Her words were honest, plain, but they carried the weight of her heart. She realized suddenly that she didn't fear him as she had feared others. Somehow he was different. Cale studied her, his gaze piercing yet unreadable. Slowly, he rose to his full height, the shadows of the trees falling across his strong frame. He nodded once, sharply, almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps there is more in you than I thought," he said, his voice low like thunder in the distance. "Be careful, Omega. The forest is not always forgiving, and neither are the packs." Lyra's chest tightened, both from relief and from the thrill of the moment. The fear was still there, yes, but so was a strange spark, an unspoken promise of something bigger, something neither of them fully understood yet. As Cale turned and vanished into the shadows, Lyra clutched the pup close, her heart still racing. The forest seemed suddenly larger, full of possibilities and dangers alike. She knew her life had shifted in a way she could not yet name. The pup's eyes, small and trusting, mirrored her own cautious hope. The night deepened. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled, some mournful, some triumphant. Lyra held the pup to her chest and whispered softly, "We'll be all right. Somehow we'll survive." She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if Cale would return. But in that moment she believed in something fragile and precious, that even the rejected, even the weak could matter. And somewhere in the darkness, unseen, Cale's amber eyes watched over them both, silent and unyielding, holding secrets he was not yet ready to share. The forest held its breath, waiting for the dawn, and the story of the Omega and the pup and the Alpha who had seen them was only beginning. The forest awoke slowly the next morning. Mist clung to the ground like soft silk, and the sun's weak light filtered through the tall pines, creating patterns of gold and shadow on the earth. Lyra stirred beneath a canopy of leaves, the pup nestled against her chest, sleeping peacefully for the first time since she had found it. She sighed, feeling the weight of her exhaustion, but a small sense of satisfaction warmed her heart. For once she had done something that mattered. Not to the pack, not to the Alpha, not to anyone else, but to a small, helpless life that had no voice of its own. The pup twitched in its sleep, letting out a soft whine, and Lyra smiled, brushing the hair from its eyes. "You're stronger than you look," she whispered. "We'll get through this, together." She knew, though, that the forest was not a safe place, especially for someone like her. Being an Omega meant she had no real power, no authority. She had to rely on caution, stealth, and the rare chance of kindness from others. And yet something inside her had shifted. Caring for the pup had awakened a strength she hadn't fully realized. As she packed the small bundle of herbs and water she had brought to help the pup recover, she sensed it before she saw it. A presence, quiet but heavy, watching her. She froze, her pulse quickening. The forest had taught her to read signs, to sense danger, and nothing in the forest moved as silently, as deliberately as Cale. He stepped from the shadows, tall and commanding, yet moving with the grace of one who belonged to the wild. His silver-streaked fur gleamed in the pale morning light, and his amber eyes held a sharp, calculating curiosity. "You returned," Cale said, his voice low but carrying easily across the clearing. "I did not expect you to care for it beyond tonight." Lyra's stomach nodded. She did not flinch, though she kept the pup close. "I could not leave it," she said simply. Her voice was calm, though her heart raced. She had learned long ago that truth, even from someone powerful, could protect her more than lies. Cale studied her silently, circling the clearing, his gaze flicking from her face to the pup, then back again. Most would see weakness in this, he said finally, his words like sharp stones tossed into still water. But you see opportunity. Or perhaps hope. His eyes lingered on her, unreadable and intense. Lyra's pulse quickened. She had heard stories of the Alpha King, how ruthless he could be, how no one dared approach him without fear. Yet now here he was watching her, and for a moment the stories fell away, leaving only the reality of his presence. She felt small, yet somehow unbroken, and that puzzled him. "Why do you care so much about what others think?" he asked, his tone softer now, almost questioning. "Your pack has cast you aside, and yet you risk yourself for another. Why?" Lyra looked down at the pup, letting its small, trusting eyes speak for her. "Because some things, some lives, deserve care," she said quietly, "even if the world ignores them." Cale's gaze softened just slightly. There was a flicker of something, respect, intrigue, maybe even admiration, but he quickly masked it, returning to his usual commanding presence. "Compassion," he said almost to himself. "A rare and dangerous thing in this forest." The pup stirred and let out a small yelp, breaking the tension. Lyra quickly leaned down, soothing it. "Shh, you're safe now," she murmured, brushing its fur with gentle fingers. She glanced at Cale, who was watching the scene with a mixture of caution and fascination. "You are unusual," Cale said finally, stepping closer. His presence was magnetic, almost overwhelming, yet Lyra did not retreat. Instead, she held the pup a little tighter, letting it rest against her chest. Most Omegas would flee at the first sign of an alpha. "I am not most Omegas," Lyra replied, her voice firm despite the tremor of nerves. She looked up into his amber eyes, steady and unyielding. "I do what I believe is right." For a long moment, Cale said nothing. Then, as if testing her, he tilted his head slightly, a slow, deliberate movement. "And yet the world will not forgive weakness," he said. "Even the smallest failure can bring ruin. Are you prepared for that?" Lyra's chest tightened, but she met his gaze. "I am," she said simply. "I've lived with it my whole life." Cale's lips curved into something faint, almost imperceptible. He had expected fear, perhaps even tears. Instead, he found courage, quiet and steadfast. The forest seemed to hold its breath around them, as if acknowledging the tension between them. "Very well," Cale said after a pause. "Then you will survive this night. But the forest, and the packs, will not always be as forgiving." Lyra nodded, her eyes returning to the pup. "I know," she whispered. "But we'll face it together." Cale studied her again, his gaze penetrating. He saw the determination, the courage, and the deep compassion that others overlooked. He also saw the loneliness, the longing, the subtle power in her kindness, and though he did not speak it, something in him stirred. A recognition of a force he could not control, a spark he could not ignore. For the rest of the day, Cale stayed at the edge of the clearing, watching without intervening. Lyra continued her care for the pup, gathering herbs, making a small nest with leaves and soft moss, and speaking to the little creature as if it were her own family. The pup, sensing safety and warmth, began to trust her, nuzzling her hand and allowing her to check its wounds without resistance. As the sun sank low, painting the forest in shades of gold and crimson, Cale approached again, his movements silent and deliberate. "You are patient," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "Most would grow frustrated, most would abandon hope." Lyra looked up, brushing sweat from her brow. "Patience is not weakness," she said firmly. "It is strength. Sometimes strength is quiet." Cale's amber eyes narrowed slightly, intrigued by her words. "Strength is often measured by survival," he said. "But perhaps there is another way to measure it." He gestured subtly to the pup. "Through what one protects?" Lyra nodded. "Yes." "Through what one chooses to care for." Cale's expression softened, though he quickly masked it behind his usual composure. He crouched slightly, careful not to frighten the pup. "And this little one, what does it teach you?" Lyra smiled faintly, a mixture of sadness and hope in her eyes. "It teaches me that even the smallest life is worth fighting for. That even those ignored by the world can matter." Cale considered her words, and for a moment the forest seemed to grow silent around them. It was a rare moment of understanding, a fragile connection forming between the Alpha King and the rejected Omega. But the forest was never truly quiet for long. From the edge of the trees, a rustling disturbed the stillness. Lyra froze. her hand instinctively tightening around the pup. Kale's ears twitched, his body tense, ready to move at a moment's notice. Something or someone was watching. And Lyra knew instinctively that this was no ordinary presence. The shadow moved closer, deliberate and silent, testing the limits of their vigilance. Kyle stepped in front of Lyra, his large frame a protective wall, amber eyes glowing in the dim light. "Stay behind me," he commanded softly. Lyra's heart raced, but she obeyed, trusting him completely. The shadow paused at the edge of the clearing, then disappeared as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a lingering sense of danger. Lyra exhaled slowly, her body trembling with both fear and relief. Kale's gaze returned to her, intense and unreadable. "The forest watches us," he said, his voice low. "And it does not forget. Neither do I." Lyra met his gaze, feeling the weight of his words and the unspoken promise behind them. Something had shifted between them, subtle but undeniable. She was still an Omega, and he was still the Alpha King, but the rules of the forest and of their hearts were beginning to change. As night fell, the clearing was bathed in silver moonlight. Lyra placed the pup in its small nest, covering it gently with moss. She glanced at Kale, who remained silent at the edge of the clearing, a shadow among shadows, watching and guarding. For the first time, Lyra did not feel completely alone. And somewhere deep within Kale, a thought flickered, a quiet, unexpected recognition that this rejected Omega, who cared for the forgotten, might be more than she appeared. The forest whispered around them, carrying the scent of danger, the promise of hope, and the faint echo of a destiny neither could yet understand. Tomorrow would bring challenges, questions, and perhaps even answers. But for tonight, Lyra held the pup close, her heart steady, and the Alpha King watched silently from the shadows, unseen yet undeniably present. And as the stars began to glimmer above the treetops, a silent truth settled over them both. Some bonds, even between the weakest and the strongest, are forged in quiet courage, and they are impossible to ignore. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth, but beneath it lingered a tension that could not be ignored. Lyra awoke to find the pup stirring beside her, its small eyes bright and alert. It yawned, stretching its fragile limbs as if ready to face the world, but the forest whispered a warning she could feel in her bones. She had grown accustomed to the quiet weight of being observed. Kale had not left the clearing during the night. Somewhere in the shadows he watched, silent, unwavering, and impossibly patient. Lyra's heart fluttered whenever she thought of him. She could not deny the pull she felt toward the Alpha King, even though fear and respect wove tightly with her curiosity. The pup nuzzled her fingers, drawing her attention back. She smiled softly, brushing the tiny creature's fur. "You're stronger today," she murmured. "We'll keep moving, but carefully. The forest isn't safe for us yet." Lyra packed her few belongings, wrapping the pup securely. Every step forward reminded her of her vulnerability. Being an Omega meant relying on others for protection, yet she also carried the courage to act alone. Her mind drifted to Kale, the memory of his amber eyes watching her through the shadows stirred something unfamiliar, something that was both thrilling and terrifying. Kale emerged from the tree line as she prepared to move. His presence was commanding, and the forest seemed to bow to his aura. He did not approach too closely, but the space between them was charged with unspoken tension. "You move carefully," Kyle said, his deep voice carrying through the quiet, "but you underestimate the dangers ahead." "I know," Lyra replied, keeping her voice calm. "But we cannot stay in one place forever." She lifted the pup, feeling its small weight against her chest. "And I will not leave it behind." Kale's gaze softened slightly as he studied her. There was something raw and unshielded in her resolve, a mix of innocence and strength that few had seen. He stepped closer, his movements deliberate, his amber eyes scanning her face as if trying to read the thoughts she had kept hidden for so long. "You are unlike any Omega I have known," Kale said quietly. "Most would flee at the first sign of risk. Most would submit without question. But you act despite fear, and that is rare." Lyra met his gaze steadily. "I do not live for fear," she said. "I live for those who cannot protect themselves." Kyle's expression softened again, though he quickly regained his usual commanding composure. "And yet compassion can be dangerous," he warned. "It can draw enemies closer, and it can expose weakness." Lyra's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. "Sometimes strength is found in what others call weakness," she replied. For a long moment, they regarded each other in silence. Cale saw her courage and determination, but he also sensed the loneliness that had shaped her life. The way she cared for the pup mirrored a deep capacity for love and loyalty, qualities that were rare even in a forest ruled by power and cunning. Suddenly, a sharp rustle came from the edge of the clearing. Lyra stiffened, instinctively pressing the pup closer to her chest. Cale's muscles tensed, his posture shifting into a protective stance. The forest seemed to hold its breath. From the shadows emerged a pair of wolves larger than any Lyra had seen, their fur dark as night and eyes glinting with malice. They belonged to a rival pack, known for their cunning and brutality. Lyra's pulse quickened, but Cale's presence beside her brought a strange sense of security. "You cannot flee," Cale said, his voice low and steady. "Face them. Do not let them see fear." Lyra nodded, drawing on the courage she had nurtured over years of rejection and hardship. She moved slightly in front of the pup, protecting it as Cale positioned himself behind her, a living shield of strength and power. The rival wolves circled, sniffing the air, their intent clear. They had come for the pup, perhaps sensing its importance, perhaps seeing it as a weak prize. Lyra's heart pounded, but she held her ground, knowing that running would only invite disaster. Kyle's amber eyes met hers, and in that glance Lyra felt something she had never felt before. Trust without hesitation. She understood that he would act, that he would protect, and that together they could face this threat. The first wolf lunged, teeth bared, but Kyle's movement was swift, precise, and commanding. He intercepted, forcing the creature back with a combination of strength and strategy that spoke of years of mastery. Lyra watched, awe mixing with fear, as the Alpha King demonstrated the power and authority that had earned him his place at the top. The second wolf circled, looking for an opening, but Lyra met its gaze. She did not strike. She did not threaten. She simply stood firm, radiating a calm that surprised even her. Cale noticed, and a flicker of admiration crossed his face. She was small, yes, but she had learned the quiet power of presence, and it was evident now. The rival wolves, sensing the unity between the Omega and the Alpha, hesitated. The forest itself seemed to echo their hesitation, shadows deepening, the wind carrying a warning through the trees. The creatures finally retreated, disappearing as silently as they had come. Lyra exhaled, her body trembling with relief and adrenaline. The pup whimpered softly and she stroked its fur, murmuring comfort. "It's over. For now," she whispered. Kyle stepped closer, his presence a shield of calm and authority. He did not touch her, but his eyes conveyed a rare warmth, a recognition of the courage she had displayed. "You held your ground," he said. "Most would have faltered." "I did what I had to," Lyra replied, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "I couldn't let them take the pup." Cale studied her, his gaze intense and unreadable. And yet, it was more than duty, wasn't it? His words were subtle, like a question wrapped in observation. Lyra's cheeks warmed, though she did not look away. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "It matters to me." For a moment the forest seemed suspended in time. Two lives, so different yet intertwined, stood together, bonded by courage, compassion, and an unspoken understanding. Cale, the Alpha King, and Lyra, the rejected Omega, had faced danger together, and in doing so, had glimpsed the potential for something neither had expected. The pup stirred again, nudging Lyra's hand. She smiled, brushing its fur gently. "We'll rest here for the day," she said softly. "We need to be ready for what comes next." Cale remained at the edge of the clearing, watching over them. His presence was both reassuring and enigmatic. He did not offer guidance, and he did not speak unnecessarily. Yet every glance, every subtle movement, conveyed that he was aware, that he was alert, and that he would act if danger returned. As the afternoon waned, Lyra worked to strengthen the pup, tending its wounds and feeding it from her small supplies. Cale observed silently, his amber eyes tracking every movement. There was an intensity in him that made the air feel charged, as if the forest itself was aware of the tension between them. "You are careful," Kyle said finally, stepping into the clearing slightly. Most Omegas would not know the first thing about survival beyond the pack's protection. But you understand balance, caution, and patience. Lyra looked up at him, meeting his gaze. I have learned, she said simply. I've had to. Cale inclined his head, a subtle acknowledgement of her truth. Good, he said. Because the forest tests everyone. Even the strongest can fall and the smallest can rise. Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine, not from cold but from the weight of his words and the unspoken promise behind them. She understood that Cale's attention was not idle. He was assessing, evaluating, and perhaps even considering her as more than an Omega. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Lyra placed the pup in its nest of moss and leaves, letting it rest while she gathered her strength. She glanced toward the tree line where Cale stood like a sentinel, and a thought struck her. Perhaps the Alpha King was not as untouchable as the legend suggested. Perhaps he too was searching for something, for someone, for meaning. The forest grew quiet as night approached, the only sounds the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft breathing of the pup. Lyra sat beside it, her heart still racing from the morning's encounter. She felt the pull of something she could not name, a mix of fear, admiration, and something deeper, more complicated. Cale remained at the edge of the clearing, unseen but present, his gaze never leaving her. He knew danger still lingered in the forest, that rival packs and unseen predators could strike at any moment, but he also knew something else. This rejected Omega, small and overlooked though she was, had a courage and a heart that could change everything. And as the stars began to glimmer through the canopy above, a silent truth settled over them both. Bonds forged in courage and compassion could defy hierarchy, expectation, and even fear. But the forest was never completely safe. Somewhere in the shadows, a new presence watched, waiting for the right moment to test them. And Lyra and Cale would soon discover that the path ahead was darker and more dangerous than either could have imagined. The forest was silent, but tension hung like a heavy fog. Lyra woke before dawn, her senses alert to every rustle and whisper of wind. The pup lay curled in its nest of moss, breathing softly, and she felt a wave of relief. But the quiet was deceptive. Danger had been close yesterday, and she knew it could return at any moment. Cale was nowhere to be seen. Lyra glanced toward the tree line, her pulse quickening, expecting to see his commanding form watching over them. Yet the clearing remained empty. She wondered briefly if he had left, only to realize that he never truly left. His presence lingered like the pull of a distant star, intangible but impossible to ignore. She gently picked up the pup, wrapping it securely in her cloak. The little creature stirred, its small eyes blinking up at her with trust and dependence. Lyra had grown attached not just to the pup's vulnerability, but to its resilience. It reminded her that even the smallest and weakest could survive and even thrive, with care, courage, and determination. The sun rose slowly, painting the forest in shades of gold and green. Lyra began to move cautiously through the underbrush, alert to every sound. She knew the rival pack had not forgotten yesterday, and the forest itself seemed alive with anticipation. Every snapping twig, every rustling leaf felt like a test of her vigilance and resolve. Then, from the edge of the clearing, Cale emerged, silent as a shadow. His amber eyes scanned the forest, alert and calculating. "We are not safe here," he said quietly. His voice carried authority, yet beneath it there was a rare softness reserved only for moments like this. "They will return, and this time they will be stronger, more cunning." Lyra nodded, her grip on the pup firm. "Then we must be ready," she replied. She had grown into a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed. And the thought of protecting the pup, her small companion, gave her courage she didn't always feel for herself. Kyle's gaze lingered on her, and for a moment the forest seemed to shrink, leaving only the two of them and the pup. "You carry a heavy burden," he said, "yet you do it willingly. Few would." "I do it because it matters," Lyra said simply, "because it cannot be ignored." Kyle inclined his head, silent for a moment. Then he stepped closer, his presence protective and commanding. "And yet caring can be dangerous," he warned. "It can draw enemies and it can expose your weakness. Are you prepared for that?" Lyra's heart tightened, but she met his gaze steadily. "I have lived with it my whole life," she replied. "Being overlooked, being rejected. It has taught me that strength is not only in power, but in persistence." Cale's amber eyes flickered, a rare hint of admiration breaking through his usual stoicism. "You are unlike any Omega I have known," he said softly. "And yet, you are not alone anymore. The forest, the pack, even I am watching you. You cannot face this alone, Lyra, do you understand?" Lyra nodded, understanding the weight behind his words. She had lived her life in solitude, in quiet struggle, and now, for the first time, she felt the possibility of partnership. Not just with the pup, but with Cale himself. The Alpha King, powerful and feared by all, had chosen to observe, to protect, and to consider her as more than an outcast. But before the moment could deepen, a shadow moved at the edge of the clearing. Lyra froze, her grip tightening around the pup. Kyle's ears twitched and his muscles tensed, alert and ready. From the darkness, a figure emerged, larger and more threatening than the rival wolves they had faced before. Its eyes gleamed with malice, and it moved with deliberate stealth. Cale stepped in front of Lyra and the pup, his frame a protective shield. "Stay behind me," he commanded softly. Lyra obeyed, her pulse racing, her instincts sharpened by the morning's tension. The figure emerged fully into the clearing, a massive wolf, scarred and cunning, with dark fur matted from previous battles. It was the leader of the rival pack, returned with allies, hungering to claim the pup for reasons Lyra could not yet understand. "You will not harm it," Kyle said, his voice calm but lethal, carrying the weight of absolute authority. The scarred wolf snarled, circling them like a predator measuring its prey. Lyra's heart raced, but she refused to step back. The pup whimpered softly, sensing the rising tension. Lyra knelt slightly, shielding it as best she could, while Cale's presence radiated a protective aura, warning the enemy not to test him. The standoff stretched, tense and silent, broken only by the distant rustle of the forest and the shallow breaths of those present. Cale's gaze never left the rival, assessing its movements, predicting its attacks. He was a master of the forest, of strategy, of authority, and yet Lyra's quiet courage did not go unnoticed. She had not faltered. She had stood her ground, defending the pup with determination rather than aggression. Finally, the scarred wolf lunged. Cale moved like a shadow, intercepting it with unmatched precision. The rivals attacked together, but the Alpha King's strategy and strength were unmatched. Lyra watched, awe mixing with fear as Cale moved fluidly, protecting her and the pup with each motion. Yet, even in the chaos, he did not shield her completely. He allowed her to act, to learn, to test her own courage. Lyra knew instinctively what to do. She could not fight like Cale, but she could outsmart them. Using the terrain, the underbrush, and the pup's small size, she lured the attackers into traps and distractions, surprising even herself with her own cleverness. Each move built her confidence, her bond with Kyle growing silently as they moved in unspoken harmony. The fight ended as suddenly as it had begun. The rivals retreated, humiliated and wary, leaving the clearing in silence once more. Lyra exhaled deeply, trembling from adrenaline and relief. She bent to check on the pup, brushing its fur gently. "It's over. For now," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with resolve. Cale stepped forward, his amber eyes meeting hers. There was no anger, no condescension, only respect and something deeper, unspoken yet undeniable. "You held your ground," he said. "Most would have fled. Most would have panicked, but you showed courage and wisdom. And that is rare." Lyra felt her chest tighten. "I did what I had to," she replied. "I could not let them take it." Kyle's gaze softened, and for the first time he allowed a hint of vulnerability to show. "You are stronger than you know," he said quietly. "And yet you carry the burden of compassion as well. That is a weight not easily borne." Lyra looked down at the pup, then back at him. "I carry it because it matters," she said firmly. "Because it cannot be ignored." Kyle nodded slowly, the forest around them silent, bearing witness to their bond. "Very well," he said. "Then we face the next challenge together." Even as he spoke, Lyra sensed the forest itself holding secrets, watching their every move. Somewhere beyond the clearing, danger lingered, new threats, new rival packs, and perhaps something older, darker, waiting for the right moment to strike. Lyra wrapped the pup securely in her cloak and glanced at Cale. "Where do we go now?" she asked, her voice calm, though excitement and fear mingled in her chest. Kyle's eyes scanned the horizon, thoughtful and intense. "We move carefully," he said. "The forest tests us at every turn, and the path ahead is fraught with peril. But we will survive, together. As they prepared to leave the clearing, the wind shifted, carrying with it a new scent, a subtle, almost imperceptible warning. Lyra's instincts flared. Danger was near. She tightened her grip on the pup, and Kale's stance grew more rigid, muscles coiled like springs. The forest whispered around them, alive with unseen eyes, shadows, and secrets. Lyra felt the weight of the moment, the burden of responsibility, and the strange, growing connection between herself and Kale. She understood that survival meant more than strength. It meant trust, courage, and unity. And as night approached, the clearing bathed in silver moonlight, Lyra knew that the challenges ahead would test everything she had learned. But she also knew one undeniable truth: she would not face them alone. The Alpha King, the fierce and unyielding Kale, would stand with her, and the bond they had forged in courage and compassion could withstand even the darkest of shadows. Yet the forest was never truly still. From deep within its heart, a new presence stirred, unseen but intent, watching and waiting. Lyra and Kale would soon discover that the trials ahead were greater, darker and more dangerous than either could have imagined, and so, under the cold silver light of the moon, they moved forward, an Omega, an Alpha, and a small, injured pup, together into the unknown. The forest was dark yet alive. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind carried a warning that could not be ignored. Lyra clutched the pup tightly against her chest, feeling its small heart beating rapidly. They had traveled cautiously since dawn, moving through shadows and underbrush, guided by Kale's unwavering presence. Kale led the way silently, muscles coiled and senses alert. His amber eyes scanned the darkness for any sign of threat, his every movement precise, deliberate. Lyra followed closely, trusting him completely, yet aware that danger could appear from any direction. The forest seemed almost aware of their passage, the shadows twisting and deepening as if watching, waiting. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the trees. Lyra froze, her pulse quickening. Kale's ears twitched, and he crouched slightly, his body tense with controlled energy. The growl deepened, and then from the shadows emerged the largest wolf Lyra had ever seen. Its fur was black as night, its eyes glowing a fierce amber, and it moved with a predatory grace that made every muscle in her body ache with tension. Kale stepped in front of her immediately, his body a living shield. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice calm but filled with authority. Lyra nodded, her hands tightening around the pup. She could feel Kale's focus, his awareness of every movement, every subtle shift in the forest. The massive wolf circled, testing them, and then lunged with incredible speed. Kale moved with equal precision, intercepting the attack and forcing the creature back. The forest seemed to vibrate with the clash of power, the tension between predator and protector. Lyra's heart raced, but she knew she could not remain passive. She had learned much over the past days. Courage was not only in strength, but in quick thinking and resolve. Spotting a fallen branch, she held it out, swaying it to distract the wolf. Her actions were small, but they worked. The wolf hesitated, giving Kale the opening to push it back further. The pup whimpered, sensing the danger, and Lyra whispered soothingly, "It's okay. We're here. We're together." Her voice was calm, even as adrenaline surged through her. The words carried more than comfort. They carried the quiet strength she had developed, the bond she had nurtured with the pup, and, unexpectedly, with Kale. Kale moved like a shadow, fluid and unstoppable, intercepting each strike with precision and control. He did not merely fight. He strategized, guiding Lyra with subtle gestures, keeping her safe while allowing her to contribute. He saw her courage, her determination, and the quiet power she wielded through her care and cleverness. The massive wolf lunged again, but Kale anticipated the attack. With a swift movement, he forced it to the ground, his dominance clear without unnecessary violence. The forest seemed to exhale, the shadows retreating slightly as the predator recognized the authority before it. Lyra exhaled, her body trembling from the intensity of the encounter. She bent down, brushing the pup's fur gently. "It's over," she whispered, though the adrenaline still coursed through her veins. The pup pressed closer to her, its trust unwavering, its small body trembling slightly in relief. Kale stepped closer, his amber eyes locking with hers. There was no anger, no judgment, only respect and something deeper, unspoken yet undeniable. You held your ground, he said softly. Most would have fled. Most would have panicked. But you acted with courage and intelligence. That is rare. Lyra felt her chest tighten. I did what I had to, she replied. I could not let them take it. Kyle's gaze softened, and for the first time he allowed a hint of warmth to show. You are stronger than you know, he said quietly. And yet you carry the burden of compassion as well. That is a weight not easily borne. Lyra looked down at the pup, then back at Kale. I carry it because it matters, she said firmly, because it cannot be ignored. Kyle nodded slowly, his amber eyes reflecting a mixture of pride, admiration, and something more complex. Very well, he said. Then we face what comes next. Together. The forest was quiet now, but the tension lingered. Lyra felt the weight of the day, the battles, the near danger, the bond forming between them. She realized with a quiet certainty that her life had changed. She was no longer invisible, no longer overlooked. She had found courage, strength, and even connection, and she had found it in an unexpected place, in the presence of Kale, the Alpha King, and in the care for a small, injured pup. Kale watched her carefully, noting the subtle changes in her posture, her confidence, her resolve. He realized that her courage was not born from power but from care, from the willingness to protect what others ignored. And that realization stirred something in him he had long thought buried, something beyond duty, beyond instinct, something profoundly human. As they moved deeper into the forest, the pup nestled safely against Lyra. Kale remained alert at her side. Shadows flitted between the trees, reminders that danger was never far. Yet with each step, the bond between them strengthened, a silent promise of protection, trust, and shared courage. By nightfall, they reached a secluded glade bathed in the silver glow of moonlight. Lyra settled the pup into a small nest of moss and leaves, tending it with gentle care. Cal remained on the perimeter, vigilant yet silent, his presence a reassuring force. You have grown, Cal said quietly, approaching her after a moment. His eyes were softer now, reflecting the quiet bond they shared. In these days you have learned courage, wisdom, and strategy. You have proven that even the smallest life can inspire strength in the strongest. Lyra looked up at him, meeting his gaze steadily. I did not do it for praise, she said. I did it because it mattered, because it could not be ignored. Cale nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. And yet you have earned respect, admiration, even from me. Lyra felt her heart stir, a mix of pride, relief, and something deeper. She had faced fear, danger, and rejection and emerged stronger. She had protected the pup, survived attacks, and gained the attention of the Alpha King. But more than that, she had discovered a quiet truth, courage. Compassion and care could form bonds stronger than fear, hierarchy, or instinct. The forest around them seemed to settle, the shadows retreating under the moon's silver light. The pup slept peacefully, safe for the first time in its short life. Lyra leaned back, her body weary but her heart light, knowing that they had survived not just through strength but through unity, trust, and compassion. Cale stepped beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. The forest will test us again, he said softly. But now you are not alone, and neither is the pup. Lyra smiled faintly, brushing the small creature's fur one last time for the night. We are together, she said, and together we can face anything. Kyle's amber eyes met hers, and in that gaze a silent understanding passed between them. They were different, yes, Alpha and Omega, strong and small. But the bond forged in courage, care, and quiet determination was unbreakable. The forest, with all its shadows, dangers, and whispers, could not sever what had been built in trust and shared strength. The night deepened, the stars shimmering through the canopy. Lyra and Cale sat together in quiet vigilance, the pup nestled between them. They had survived the trials of the forest, protected what mattered, and discovered in each other a rare and unspoken connection. And as the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, Lyra realized that life had changed forever. She had found courage, protection, and even belonging, not through fear or submission, but through compassion, cleverness, and unwavering heart. Cale remained at her side, a silent guardian, a force of strength, and perhaps something more. The forest whispered around them, shadows fading with the light as if acknowledging the bond that had formed in its depths. Lyra held the pup close, feeling the warmth of life, trust, and love surrounding them. And for the first time she allowed herself to hope, not just for survival, but for the future, for the bond she shared with Kale, and for the life she could build in a world that had once ignored her. The forest would continue to test them. Danger would always lurk in the shadows, and the past could never be fully forgotten. But they had found something rare and unbreakable: courage forged in adversity, loyalty born of care, and a bond between Omega and Alpha that no force could undo. And in that moment, Lyra knew with quiet certainty that they had survived not just for themselves, but for the pup, for each other, and for the future they would face together. The Alpha King and the rejected Omega, bound by trust, courage, and compassion, watched the sunrise together, the forest alive with possibility, and the pup safe at their feet, proof that even in the darkest wilderness, bonds forged in courage and care could shine brighter than any shadow.